I was born into a neighborhood that was jam-packed with kids, almost all of them right around my age. It seemed like every house for blocks around had at least one small child. We were all in the same place and learned to recognize each other as we moved out of babyhood, so it was just natural that we all played together. My house had both the sandbox and the swing set, so my yard was one of the more popular ones. I knew everybody, and even the occasional skirmish over something silly didn't keep us from all playing together and having a great time. But that only lasted until the summer I turned 7. What happened? Brown versus Board of Education, that's what happened. The landmark decision that desegregated schools and called for mandatory busing to accomplish it. The school district that I lived in was getting ready to comply, and my parents were having none of it. This is a direct quote. You don't need to be in a school where there's a bunch of pickaninnies running around. If you don't know what that word means, be thankful. Let me pause here a moment because I've talked a lot in these videos about my dad and the racism that plagued him all his life. He was a child of his times, his own upbringing, and influence from the southern states that were right next door to where he grew up. He was a racist. There's no denying that. But in his professional life, whether he was farming or doing real estate or tax consulting or whatever else he did, he genuinely did not see color. If you were a customer, you were a customer and you got treated with respect. In my teens, I was able to tap into that and start moving away from the racism. Thankfully, by the time I had kids of my own, I was able to teach them that people are people. Some are worth your time, some aren't, and you can't tell by looking. You have to get in there and get to know the person. But at this time, there was nobody to teach me that. The upshot of the whole thing was we moved. The suburban districts weren't into all that busing stuff, so they moved me to one of those and into a nice, safe, quiet neighborhood. They assured me there'd be plenty of kids at the new place and I'd be making friends soon enough. They were mistaken. It might as well have been a retirement community. There was exactly one other kid my age on the block, and she wasn't interested in playing with a boy. I couldn't understand that because in the old place it didn't matter who was a boy or girl, we all just played together. So this was something new to me. To make matters worse, we did the conventional wisdom of the time. We moved at the beginning of summer vacation rather than at some time during the school year. The idea was that it was better to relocate during break so a child had a chance to get used to the new surroundings before starting back to school, as opposed to moving during the school year, which supposedly disrupted learning and was more traumatic for the child. Well, it only took about 150 years, but somebody finally asked some kids about that and found out the conventional wisdom was wrong. But nobody knew that in 1960. I land in this new place. There's nobody around. There's nothing to do and nobody to do it with. Fortunately, I've always been comfortable inside my own head, and when there was nothing to do, I'd dream something up and act it out in my mind for hours on end. We had a big backyard, and I'd spend hours out there playing with my dog. My 2 nephews and I would visit each other and play together, but it wasn't the same as having friends around all the time. Then it was time to go back to school. I couldn't put it into words then, but I had a big problem. Keep in mind, all the friends that I had back in the old neighborhood I had known since birth. It was natural for them to be there because in my child's brain they always had been. Now I walked into a 2nd grade class with no idea who anybody was because the one other kid in the neighborhood wound up in a different class. I tried to set about making some new friends, and that was when I discovered something important. I didn't know how. I had no idea how to approach a child I didn't know and say, "Hi, I'm David. Would you like to play?" Just about the first thing that happened was I spotted this exceptionally pretty girl and she captured my imagination. The next recess, I sought her out where she was messing around in the sand near the play equipment. I suavely walked up to her and said, "I'm David. I think I love you." She stared at me for a second and then said, "Want to help me make this road?" We sat down and played for a bit, but it turned out one of the class bullies, who was about twice my size, also had his eye on her. He came after me and embarrassed me in front of all the other kids, and that set the tone for the next 5 years or so. I got the reputation as the kid who's not good at anything, and if you feel like beating somebody up, Washburn's always a good candidate. The first time it happened, I had no idea it was coming. I was still 7, still in 2nd grade, and I was riding my bike home when a kid I thought was my friend asked me to stop. I smiled and said hi and asked what he wanted, and without warning, he started screaming at me and hitting me. I didn't even have a chance to get off my bike. He was accusing me of calling him some name and pounded on me until I cried. I rode home in pain and confusion, still wondering what happened. After that, it became a daily thing. I had to change the route I took home because somebody was always waiting for me. Some guy or other was always making threats to pound me after school. At recess, I did find a way to make myself useful, especially when we were playing football. Of course, the good kids would never throw it to me, the butt of all the jokes. But they needed somebody to hike the ball, and it turned out I was good at that. So somebody always picked me. Last, but they always picked me. Then every so often, this one guy would be looking for a receiver, and when everybody was covered, he'd notice me standing there by myself. He'd toss it to me, not pass it, mind you. Washburn would probably drop that. But he'd toss it like he was throwing it to a toddler. I'd catch it and run for major yardage, and everybody would be flabbergasted. But I still wasn't good for anything but playing center. That was just the way it was. I had one good friend during those days, and he sort of helped make things bearable. His last name was Samuelson, and the day we met, I named him Sam. As far as I know, the name stuck right up to the present day. We stayed friends into middle school. I didn't go to a middle school. My kids went to a middle school. My nephews went to a junior high. I went to a senior elementary. Americans really have a thing about more syllables. Anyway, after 8th grade, he went to a different high school and we lost touch. But he's still a small light in all those dark years. Sam, if you're out there, thanks. That's all I can muster. At any rate, from there we moved on to the next step in being the outcast, trying too hard. Try to contribute something witty to a conversation that you're not part of. Try to help somebody with something, but get so nervous you mess it up and make it worse. Be so desperate for some kind of acceptance day after day that to make a fool of yourself because you know you're not worthless, no matter what everyone says. The classroom was a disaster. Now we know I was, and still am, about as ADHD as it gets, but in those I was just fussy and didn't apply myself. Nevertheless, I almost always knew the right answers, so next I got labeled the brain. In case you don't know, in grade school and middle school, that's a bad thing. It's cool to be ignorant. And even though I couldn't get the knowledge the way the teachers wanted me to, I always got it and did well on tests, quizzes, spelling bees, you name it, I aced them all. I figured if I was going to be a loner, I'd at least be a smart one. But I was still desperate to be in good with somebody, so I kept trying. In 6th grade, I bought a model of a guillotine. I built it and brought it to school, and some kids and I would spend recess making stories around it. The teacher didn't like it, especially when I get sidetracked with stuff like that when I was supposed to be doing schoolwork in class. I took many trips to the principal's office where he would make me lean over and grab my ankles, then he'd give me 2 or 3 swats on the butt. Now, I know, parents today would have a cow at that, but really it was no big deal. I was 12 by this time and almost as tall as my teacher was, and the swats didn't hurt. They were supposed to be more embarrassing than anything else, but whenever I came back to class from one of those sessions, the guys I was trying to impress would be smiling and nodding as if I'd just received a medal. It was as close as I ever got. Middle school was no different. There were new people, but there were enough of the old ones that the reputation followed me and I never had a chance. I still went for the good grades and being the brain. At least it was something I could be proud of. Then in my freshman year of high school, I lost that too. I don't mean I suddenly became a dimwit or something like that. Or in a sense, maybe I did. I have a gift for languages. They come easily to me. And in California in the 60s, they were very into teaching us Spanish in school. I loved it. By 6th grade, I was better at it than the teacher was because his accent was horrible. Through 7th and 8th grades, I not only got perfect grades, I helped tutor other kids that were struggling. Then in 9th grade, I gained a fan. I gained a fan in the form of my teacher. She could see the gift I had, but went about trying to develop it all the wrong ways. She held me up as the ideal example to the whole class. I didn't do the same work the rest of the class did. I sat off by myself and read advanced books. I kept waiting for her to sacrifice a goat to me. I hated every second of that because I could feel the scorn and ridicule emanating from the other kids. I'd had a lifetime of that and had enough. I quit trying. It spilled over into all my classes. My grades plummeted. I was severely depressed. I stayed like that for the next 2 years. Then, in the summer of my 17th year, I discovered the answer to everything. My parents had resisted the idea of having my tonsils out for my whole life up to that point. But now I was old enough to make my own decision, and I was tired of the sore throats, infections, and all the rest. I arranged to get them removed. About 2 hours before the procedure, a nurse came in and gave me a pill that I recognized. It was a barbiturate called Nembutal, and my mother and two of my sisters used it regularly as a sleeping pill. It was supposed to start making me sleepy in preparation for the anesthesia. I took it as ordered, expecting to fall asleep. That wasn't what happened. Within half an hour, the world was beautiful and all my cares melted away. I knew this was how I wanted to feel all the time. I completely withdrew at school. By my senior year, I'd pretty well stopped going. Oh, I might hang out in the parking lot and smoke with some of the other losers, but most of the time I'd pop a pill or two and go to a nearby park, hang out and watch the ducks and listen to music on my little portable tape player. Nobody in my family had any idea I was doing drugs, but it was clear something had changed and I wasn't unhappy anymore. I spent the next 2 years in a Nembutal haze. At the peak of it, I was taking 500 milligrams at a time, 4 times a day. Needless to say, I didn't graduate from high school. Eventually, my sister got me off the pills. That's a story in itself. But it pretty well brings me to the conclusion of this chapter. Here's my point. In the wake of all the mass shootings in America lately, we've seen an attempted campaign called Walk Up, Not Out. The idea is that instead of walking out of class to protest and march for gun control, try to befriend the outcast and maybe they won't try to kill you. Let me tell you from experience why this won't work, and I can do it in 2 words. It's insincere. Larry was one of the cool kids, and he was usually chosen as a team captain during recess. He noticed that I was always getting picked last, so he started doing something about it. He'd pick me second or third. Unfortunately, he could never remember my name, so he would always end up pointing to the back of the gaggle of boys and say, "Him." He was walking up, but I knew why, and so did everybody else. It didn't help. In fact, it often made matters worse because once I was on the team, he couldn't give me anything significant to do. I would have preferred to have things stay the way they were because all Pity did was twist the knife in my gut. If someone is only approaching that kid because they're afraid they might go off the rails or because someone is more or less pressuring them to, the outcast is going to know it. We can tell. We know Pity when we experience it. Don't do it. If you really want to get to know that person, do it. If you honestly think they might be a potential friend or even just a casual acquaintance that you say hi to and make small talk with, go for it. But if that's not your goal, if you're doing a Pity walk-up, please don't insult our intelligence. We know what you're doing and it's not helping. Harsh, but there it is. That's my take on this whole matter and why I think I'm qualified to speak on it. My story isn't that unusual. If the current generation of kids is ready to take on the inevitability of the so-called pecking order and break it down, go for it with my blessing and that of millions of others like me. But you damn well better mean it.